Yeah, you can go.
Okay, going to take one last sip of water. Merhaba. Thank you for this invitation to talk about families and their ECI journey. And I want to thank you, Ibrahim, and your team for helping me, supporting me during this recording. And I also want to share a thank you to the organizing and scientific committees. Again, it's such an honor to be here with you. And as you can see, the title of my presentation is I Felt Alone. And you'll figure out in just a few slides why I'm using this title. But to get us started, what you will need to have nearby is some paper and a writing tool, a pen or a pencil, your cell phone, believe it or not. And then finally, on your cell phone, you may have a calculator app, and you will need to have that open at some point. So I'd like to start by asking you to write down these numbers: 148667602. And in just a minute, I'll tell you why these numbers are so important. So I'll give you a few more seconds to write those down. And then I'd like to set the stage with a story from early in my career. And so I've spent my whole life in early childhood intervention. And when we first started in Ohio, which is where I live in the middle of the United States, we were still very center based. And I was at a children's hospital here in Ohio. And so families would come to us once a week. And there was one particular mother, that really just we were drawn to. And her name was Alana. And she had, and I think the baby, Lori, was about a year old at the time. And Lori was born with hydrocephalus, a very significant case of hydrocephalus. And so Lori, the baby, looked very different. But of course, we thought she was beautiful, and her mom thought she was beautiful. So Alana would bring Lori, and then Lori's older sister, who was 4, they would come to our program once a week. And so again, we were center based. We never were thinking about making a home visit. But what we found out after Alana and Lori moved on from ECI was what happened when they left our center. They went home. Alana shut the door, closed the curtains, and they never went out again. And and I am still, I this was years ago, and I'm still feeling so guilty. How could we have missed what was happening outside the 1 hour a week we had with this family? What was going on? Did she have no support? Um, she had shared some stories with us about people commenting on the baby, on Lori. And so, but we never knew. And I thought we had a great program. Parents loved us. Alana came every single week. But how could we have missed what was happening outside our program at the center? And so over the years, Ohio and the US and many countries have shifted from center-based to home visits, and typically once a week for an hour. And so in 2017, I became involved in a project called Project Trees. And that was a special project to take a look at what was happening in ECI across the state of Ohio. And we were particularly concerned with how were families experiencing this ECI journey. And so we put together and traveled around the state and did 7 focus groups with families. And you can see here it was primarily mothers, but also some fathers, a grandfather, and 2 grandmothers. So across the state in our travels, we talked to 56 family members. And so we asked a series of questions, and I want to share the answers of 2 of those questions in this next slide. So, how isolated did you feel at times during those first 3 years? And again, in the United States, early intervention is from birth to 3, which is why we're asking during those first 3 years. And then, what factors led to feelings of isolation, feeling alone? And here are some of the answers. For someone to say there's something wrong with your child, it's very alone. Giving up career to stay home or tag teaming with a spouse. So that means, the mom is awake and caring for the child 12 hours a day, and then the husband works during the day and comes home, and the mom works nights. So it's just, this incredibly intense schedule. Or the husband being deployed in the military somewhere. No one else to relate to. Family and friends don't understand, they won't, or they don't know how to help. I have friends, one mom said, but I don't have friends. People with healthy babies really don't get it. Not knowing if you're making the right decision. Living in a small village, it's not like you can walk outside and find someone to talk to. Comparing your child to siblings, cousins, friends, children, not sure whom to trust, differing advice from different professionals, and not just isolation, but depression. So, 2 more questions that we asked during those focus groups. How did your life as a family change after having a child that needed early intervention services? What things, if any, became more difficult, or did you have to give up? So, what families told us, our hopes and dreams. Sleep, being away from the family. The baby was in the hospital, the mother would stay there. She was not, at home with the 2 older children. Time, time together as a family, adult time, time with siblings, time for myself, vacations. Freedom, now a slave to appointments, not being able to go places at all or without extensive planning, always juggling schedules, trying to prioritize and balance a lot of extra cogs in your machine to get turning. This one really struck my heart, wanting another child. This was a family who had their first child with a significant genetic issue. Career, things I love to do. My family and friends, if relationships became full of stress. And what people take for granted, we had to give up. These were the same feelings as when we started, 30, 40 years ago in Ohio. Families are still experiencing these feelings during their time in ECI. And one mother actually said very clearly, no one ever asked me about me. The mother said, no one ever asked me about me. And I didn't think I could share my feelings with the ECI. So just because someone carries it well doesn't mean it isn't heavy. And again, I love this particular photo because it reminds me of one of the people that I worked with on this project, Project Trees. And she was a parent who had twins prematurely. And she recalled her time in early intervention. And again, at that time, it had shifted to home visits. But it was just chaotic for her inside. But she tried her best to look good, you know. And so she really said, when you come to my home as a professional, things may look great, You know, we have a nice car, we have a nice house, but I want you to know inside I'm falling apart. And so I think many of you will recognize this story from families when you meet them for the first time in ECI. What they planned was not what happened. And so again, thinking back to the beginning, and this definition was published in kind of one of the first books about ECI in the US. And this book was published right about the time that Alana and Lori were part of our program. So early intervention services are educational, health, and social services designed to support the development of very young children who, in minor or major ways, have been identified as different. They are also designed to support and strengthen the families that are the primary influences on these children. So again, the emphasis was on services for the child. And oh, by the way, yes, we can also think about supporting the family. So I want you to think about this paradigm shift that has happened. Thinking about currently, what is ECI? The different types of parenting supports provided by early childhood practitioners and other social network members. Look at this graphic on the left side of your screen. The family in the middle, surrounded by many people, sometimes holding hands, dancing around the family. And that support is intended to provide parents the time, energy, knowledge, and skills to engage their children in everyday child learning opportunities that promote and enhance both child and parent confidence and competence. So the current definition based on years of research, years of looking at outcomes, really begins with the family. So thinking about all these shifts that we've made from being child focused to an ecological model, uh, being moving from professional centered to family centered, moving from deficits to focusing on strengths, moving from our professional skills to relationship based and capacity building, moving from, being isolated and lonely in the home to how do we support the family's active participation in the community. And so again, what we thought back then at this moment that we were missing, what was going on in Alana's life, was that here was the magic. The magic was 1 hour a week with the family. And at that time, they were coming to us. But now, we have moved from center base to visits in the home. So what we know now, the consistent adults in a child's life have the greatest influence on the child's learning and development, not professionals. Or as I love a quote from Yuri Bronfenbrenner, children don't grow up in programs. They grow up in families and in communities. So what happens between our visits with family is most critical for learning. So typically what we're seeing now is that when we're with a family, we're focused on the caregivers because they are the ones with the child 24/7. And so the magic doesn't happen 1 hour a week. If we focus on the caregivers, and again, it's a team, a transdisciplinary team. If we focus on the caregivers during our 1 hour a week, that translates to hours, 84 hours of interaction and learning opportunities for the child and the family, both at home and in the community. So I want to just stop for a second and dig a little deeper into this shift from thinking that our hour with a family is the magic to maybe it's really what's happening between our visits is the magic. So here is a typical way of looking at ECI. And this is from a presentation that was given in Ohio. So this is the Ohio model. We make a home visit, we talk with the family, we come up with ideas, developmental ideas for the family, how to involve the child in learning opportunities. So we go away for a week. The family implements strategies suggested by the provider. We come back a week later for our hour visit, do more, have conversations with the family, check on how things are going. We go away and we come back the following week. So sometimes in Ohio, depending on the availability of service providers, it may be 2 weeks between our home visits. But this is typically, I think, what Portugal does, what Serbia is doing, every once a week for about an hour. So this is a slide from a presentation that Robin McWilliam did in 2022, 3 years ago. And so many of you will be familiar with Robin's work, routines-based intervention, routines-based interview. And, I love Robin. It just, he is just great fun. He's contributed so much to the field. And so his intent with this slide, and I understand it because I've used the slide in this way, is illustrating that our 1 hour a week with the family is only a tiny sliver of the child and family's life the rest of the week. So we've got 7 circles, 1 day a week, a tiny little sliver. So when I saw this slide, I emailed Robin and I said, I really want to use this slide in a presentation that I'm doing. And this was maybe 2 years ago. And he said, Marilyn, as long as you tell them it's my great artwork, you're free to use it. And so then I started thinking about, okay, what is great art? And so this is great art. So there are 2 qualities of great art. First of all, it has a strong emotional impact on the viewer. I loved this. I just thought about it all the time. It's just like, oh, what does this mean? I look at this and I love this portrayal. And the second aspect of great art is this. It has a long-lasting impression. You can't forget it. You keep thinking about it. So I kept looking at it, which led me to think about it maybe in a different way. And so to dig a little deeper into, we can see different things when we look at great art. I am going to, in the next slide, it will show up black to start with. But what I'm going to show you is a picture. And I'm going to keep it up for 5 seconds. And so I want you to decide, is it a goat or is it a bird on this picture? Are you ready? Okay, here it comes. And there it goes. So if I were with you in person, I would ask you to tell me what you saw, a goat or a bird, and I would ask you to raise your hands. And so typically, I will say whenever I use this photo, it's split kind of half and half. Some people see the goat, some people see the bird, and some people actually are able to see both. And most people are if I had left it up longer. So here it is, one last time. And if you think it's a bird, that's because you saw the beak in the upper left and the eyes of the bird, and then the rest of the body of the bird. But if you saw a goat, at least what you might have started with was in the upper right was the mouth of the goat, the mouth of the goat. And then, the goat had its head turned, and you could see an eye and one ear. So again, many of us can look at the same objective object or conversation, but it can be interpreted in different ways. And we're both right. It was a goat and it was a bird. So here I want to go back to Robin's circles. When we look at this, and Robin's intent was to really focus on that tiny black sliver. But we usually don't think much about the rest of the circles. And so when I looked at this, first of all, I saw the sliver when I first saw it, and then I started thinking, but what about the rest of the circles? What about those empty circles? What's happening there? So what I'd like you to do at this point is to take out paper, pencil, and if you have an app, a calculator app on your phone, pull that up because we're going to do some math together to talk about those circles, those 7 circles. All right. So first of all, I want you to calculate what is 7 times 24. Oops. And that will give you 168. Now take 168 times 60. 10,080. Between our visits, 10,080 minutes. 7 times 24, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 60 minutes an hour. 10,080 minutes between our visits. So, what's going on in those minutes? A mother waking up at 2 a.m., searching online, for perhaps being isolated and alone in her house. What is going on between our visits? So if what happens between our interventions is most critical, 168 hours, 10,080 minutes before the family sees us again, who is there to support the parent when we're not there? So I'd like to go back for a minute to look at more quotes from the focus groups from 2017. When my son first got diagnosed, we knew we weren't the first, but we felt alone. We felt alone. I felt alone. I felt alone, alone and trapped. At night, I wake up and worry, what will happen if I'm not here? Your expectations of what your life was going to be like, the picture that you have, that's the thing you give up, the picture of what it was going to be. Remember the slide? What I planned versus what happened. I felt lonely and isolated. Constantly going to doctor's appointments always felt like I was going somewhere. I didn't really have anyone to relate to. All my friends were getting excited about their child's milestones. So what we see happening to many families is their support system begins to get smaller and smaller. Perhaps the grandparents don't agree with the diagnosis. The grandparents aren't willing to watch the child so the mother and the father can have some time together away. Um, the friends, who have children who are typically developing, sometimes those friendships become much, much weaker. Um, it's harder for many families to be out in the community and build relationships out there. So why does this matter to ECI? Well, I'm sure you know the answer. 10,080 minutes when we're not there. Why does that matter? Let's go back to the definition, the contemporary definition of early childhood intervention. 7 times 24 times 60 equals 10,080 minutes. So again, ECI is the different types of parenting supports provided by us, but look at the red, matching the 10,080 minutes, and other social network members that provide parents the time, energy, knowledge, and skills to engage their children in everyday child learning opportunities, which eventually results in greater child and parent confidence and competence. But here's what we know, and that's why this definition has shifted. Parents are not able to engage their children in everyday learning opportunities if they do not have the time and psychological energy to carry out parenting roles and responsibilities. So when we're not there, who is? The support from members of the family's social networks serve as a safety net, a net that can hold families up and keep them from falling during those 168 hours, 10,080 minutes. So, time for another small activity. What you will need is paper and pen, your phone, and put the phone up to your ear, because I'm going to ask you a series of 5 questions, and I would like to ask you to write down the name of the person who is the answer to those questions. So question number 1, who would you call? And you'll write down the name of the person that you will call if you're getting ready to go to work, and if you have a car, you walk out to the street and see you have a flat tire. If you're a person who takes the bus, you just missed it, and there's not another bus for 30 minutes, and you're going to be late for work. Who are you going to call? Write that down. Question number 2. You're a parent, and you go to the crib in the morning because you hear your baby waking up. And you see the baby has a rash that you have never, ever seen before as a parent. Who are you going to call? Write that down. Question number 3. You just got some news from your best friend, someone that you see almost every day, that you spend time with on the weekends. Your best friend has just told you that she or he will be moving in a week to a different city 500 kilometers away. Who are you going to call? Write it down. Question number 4. Bad day at work or graduate school. Bad day, bad day. And you go home exhausted, and you find, because you have a pet, you have a dog or a cat, what you find is that your pet has thrown up on the rug inside the front door. Who are you going to call? And then the 5th question is, who are you going to call If you had just bought the winning lottery ticket, you're rich. Who are you going to call? So I want you to just take a look at your five answers and let's think about where they fall in your network of support. So social support is provided through each family's networks. So thinking about it, let's start with the family kinship network. And that's your grandparents, in-laws, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. So that may be where many of your answers came from. Or it could be your informal network, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your fellow students, people who work where the family shops, where you shop. Okay. Or the third group of support or network of support is professionals. Okay, the people that like the person who does my hair, all right, or my doctor. So take a look at your answers and where do they fall? And which circle got the most answers? So typically when I do this presentation, most of the answers fall either within the kinship, your kinship network, or your informal network. Some of you may have had answers from your formal support network, but typically time and time again in these presentations, it's kinship and informal network that contain most of the answers. So why is this important? All right, so this is, if you're familiar with Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work, this is his ecological theory of child development. And Carl Dunst, and I'm sure all of you recognize the name of Carl Dunst, adapted this to think about ECI. So here we are, ECI providers outside the circle, all right? And several circles away are the nuclear family, the parents, the caregivers, child, siblings. Next out from the family are the kinship supports, the aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, other members. And then the next circle out are the informal supports for families, friends, church members, other parents, social groups, coworkers, neighbors. And again, and if you're familiar with this, you know that the closer the circle is to the nuclear family, the greater the influence that circle has on the developing child. And again, as Yuri Bronfenbrenner quoted, children don't grow up in programs. They grow up in families and communities. And it doesn't mean that we're not important. We're very important in our visits with families. We contribute to their success. We provide them support to increase their competence and confidence, right? But these circles do as well. And they're the circles in the 10,080 minutes. So what we know, again, from years of research, is that the kinship, informal, and formal networks are all important in helping families to adapt to their child's delay or disability. But those networks operate in different ways, have different impacts. And so kinship and informal supports, the circles that are close to the family, have a stronger relationship to a variety of outcomes, stronger than the formal supports. So quality of life, positive relationships, satisfaction with the parenting role, decreased stress, enhanced parenting competence, confidence, and enjoyment, and increased time and energy to carry out child rearing and parenting tasks and roles. So let's go back to Robin's circles and think about this. All right, let's start with, and you will see they're color coded. So the formal network is kind of a purpley purple, theoretically. All right, so here's our visit. So what's happening the rest of the week when we're not there? So here we are. These are the family members. the kinship, the grandmother who will help out with childcare, family get-togethers, the child playing with the cousins, talking to, the sisters or the siblings, uncles, aunts on the phone. You see how these circles are starting to fill up. Then we think about the informal, the friends at work for families, perhaps neighbors. Um, they are aspects. They help fill up those white circles as well. Then again, there will be some professionals involved, and those may be specific to the child, but also for the family, as I talked about, perhaps my doctor or my child's doctor. So what's really important, I think, is the power of these circles and how do we begin to understand them? And many of you may already be familiar with this quote, but I'm going to read it. The practices that are related to parent, family, and child outcomes include those considered as best practices. We're being trained, we implement family-centered practices, relational and participatory, but also practices that are still not a main focus of ECI. And those are what we're talking about today. The informal social supports. Who's there when we're not there? This is unfortunate because these latter variables, as well as family strengths, were found to be important in terms of explaining the availability of child learning opportunities, positive parenting beliefs and practices, and child well-being, learning, and development. Time, energy, knowledge, and skills. So one of the ways that we can learn more about a family support system is using a tool called mapping. And many of you may have already been trained in mapping, but it's basically sitting down with a family and helping them identify and putting themselves in the middle, who's out there in those circles around them and how do they support the family. And so again, sometimes when you do this, families, your circles will be small. That would have been the smaller one would be my circle. If any of you have met my colleague and good friend, Dr. Anna Serrano, who is chair of the board of the European Association on Early Childhood Intervention, I will say Anna knows everybody. All right, so her circle of friends and relatives, and it's just huge. So some families will have small, some families will have medium, and some families will have large members in their circle. But what we also know is size is not the same as quality. My circle, the small one, that works for me. I'm an introvert. That works for me. Anna's circle works for her. So when we use this tool of mapping, only the family can determine how well their support system works for them. So families don't work on their priorities alone. They have people they trust and can rely on for help and advice. 7 days, 168 hours, 10,080 minutes between our visits. It is within relationships that families reach their goals. So when parents have this sense of connectedness throughout the week between our visits, they believe they have people who care about them as individuals and as parents. They feel secure and confident that they have others with whom they can share the joy, pain, and uncertainties that come with the parenting role. They seek timely assistance from people they have learned to count on when faced with challenges. And they feel empowered to give back through satisfying, mutually beneficial relationships. And so I want to tell you just very quickly one brief story about the power of mapping and social support. And this happened in a program in Northwest Ohio. Um, there are no big cities there. There are a lot of farms, very isolated farms. And this story happened during COVID. And so programs in Ohio basically shut down, moved to virtual, but shut down during COVID. So no one was making home visits to this mother. Um, and so, but they had actually done a mapping activity with her. And so they were talking to her later as we begin to figure out, oh, virtual or now COVID, the rules have changed. We can go into this family's home. This mother told them because she was very isolated during this time where programs were not happening. And she shared with her team that what made a difference for her was her map, her eco map. She said, there were times where I was seriously depressed. I was actually considering, you know, taking my life, honestly. She said, but then I looked at my map and I saw how many people were there to support me. So I want to close with three slides that I think those of you who have ever run in a race or have gone to support someone else in a race will recognize. So here are some people running, all right? And actually, this story came to me when I was in Barcelona working on a project, and I happened to arrive the day of the Barcelona Marathon. And one of the project team actually had run marathon that day, and she had started running the race with a parent. I don't know if she had worked with a parent directly, but it was a parent who had a child with a disability who had been in ECI. And they, ran together for maybe, a 5K distance. And then all of a sudden the mother said, I'm going to take off and run. I think I can go now. I want to go faster. I'm going to take off and run. And so I think what's really important because the person, Diana, who was our Spanish colleague who was telling this story, she said, that's ECI. We run together with families during their time in ECI, but it is like a sprint because it's short term. But when ECI is over, we want them to be able to go ahead and run the marathon because they are feeling more confident and competent. And so if you've ever run a race, you've ever have been there, you know that you're never alone as a runner. There's always people around you. And I will say, even if you're in the last, I will say there are people around you. You're never alone. So here's your challenge. Oh, and I also want to say, and there are people by the side of the road who are cheering you on. There's music playing, there's people cheering, it's clapping. So you're never alone because you're surrounded by people running with you and the crowds who are cheering you on. So here's one I want to challenge you to think about. Who is there to cheer for the family when you're not there? Who's there to cheer for the family between our visits? When they leave ECI, when they're beginning the rest of their marathon? How do we implement ECI in a way that supports parents to have the time, energy, knowledge, and skills? We as providers can't do it alone. Families can't do it alone. These social networks around the family are key for those 10,080 minutes every week. So I want to thank you very much for allowing me to spend this time with you. I do have a funny story. I really practiced hello in Turkish. But I have not quite mastered thank you in Turkish, but you will see it's there. It's there. So thank you very much for this time together. Take care. Bye bye.